Safety that you may or may not be aware of, but this session is basically for the full access or super users, how to start a basic risk register. So getting started, as you know, this is the landing page, the My Dashboard. And from here, we've got some new and some old features. So down here, we know that wherever we are in the module is the Help button. So if I was to click Help while I'm in the dashboard, I would get the top suggestions for the help guide for the dashboard. A new feature is also the Provide Feedback button. If I click on Provide Feedback, you'll see that service@damstratechnology.com. Here's where you can report any feedback or give general improvement suggestions here. To report a bug, you can simply email service@damstratechnology.com, and that's what we call putting in a ticket. And of course, wherever you are in the system, if you saw a little black circle with a question mark in it, that would give you more information on what that field is for. So we have a look at the data and performance indicators. We can see what's included in total injuries. And of course, right at the top, under this question mark, is our online help. And that opens up in a new tab where we can click on Knowledge Base, and there's a wealth of guides in here for every module that's in your Damstra Safety Enterprise. So if I was to type in notifications, I could look at the guide for configuring notifications and escalations. There's a lovely wee video there that you could watch, or you could download the PDF or the PowerPoint. And here are the notifications and escalation triggers. So back to my database, I'm going to go straight into the settings now and show you some new stuff in there. I'm going to go settings. And up here in the top, this is what we call the dangerous stuff. This is the stuff that affects your database site-wide, not just for the site that you're a part of. I'm going to go to options and preferences. And you'll see down here that we've got a few new features called global investigators. And when this is ticked, this will allow a user to allocate a designated investigator from any site across the company. And it's the same with global sensitive users. We can allow the assignment of sensitive people across all the sites. Global corrective controls. This is where we can allow reassignment of corrective actions via web form and My Actions. As I come down here, there are two fields here relating to risk assessment. One's called hazard controls, and the other one is called post-control scoring for impacts. For this demonstration, I'll just be leaving them off to make a simple risk register. But if you wanted to learn any more about post-control scoring for impacts, you can go to the guide, and using the impacts feature, you could read all about it there. But please be aware that turning this on, post-control scoring for impacts, does affect the whole risk register across your site. Back into settings, and go to the events register, and there's a field here called Event Fields Mandatory. So I'm going to click on that, and in Event Fields Mandatory, this is where we could rename our event to incident, and our near miss could be leave it at near miss, or some companies prefer near hit. And these are the mandatory fields that we require for an event to be completed. I've hidden milestone timer and hide the priority across all my events, just for a simple event register. And here, minimum sensitive users. If an event was made sensitive, the person could choose 1 as a minimum, or if I change that to 2, you'll see that there's a pop-up that says not enough sensitive users to meet this requirement. So you would have to go to your user group authorization or your user profiles and add some more sensitive users. So I'll put that back to 1. And of course, down here, mandatory fields, I could show investigation not required if I didn't want to investigate every incident. And I could tick and untick anything in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to shoot straight down to the people module now, to the worker register. And I'll search for my favourite employee, Larry. There's Larry Bean, Actions and Edit. And if you haven't seen this before, in the worker file, there's a tab called Responsibilities. And if I click on Responsibilities, we can see that all responsibilities, corrective actions, events are all separated out. These are the responsibilities allocated to Larry. So if Larry was to go on leave for a month, or Larry was to quit and move to another company and we employed someone else, instead of setting all these up or losing them in the system, we could assign them separately to different people in the worker register, or we could assign all of Larry's responsibilities in one hit to another worker. This is also very handy when people leave the company or are terminated. You can unarchive that worker and allocate or assign all their responsibilities to the new person. So that's the worker register with responsibilities. Some other things I wanted to show you in the big module, the events register, if you didn't already know, was if I have a look in an event and I open up that event, and in the event details page, if I scroll down, there are some tabs here, the event categorization. If this was an environmental event and I click on environment and I shoot back up to the top, you'll see that the environment tab opens. And here's a whole bunch more of fields that you could add to, collect your data. And the risk matrix will be attached to the environmental for your initial risk analysis and your residual. Of course, you could also click here and have your monitoring register and your activity log and all your photos. Then go back to the events details page and I'm going to click on MVA. If you don't have this in your events register, please email service@damstratechnology.com and have it switched on if this is useful for you. I've ticked MVA, go up to the top again, and you'll see that the MVA tab has appeared at the top. And here's where I could record everything about my vehicle accident, who attended, the insurance, fill out as many fields as I want, the pictures, driver and vehicle, damage, anyone else involved, and I could save that to events. So that's the environment and the MVA tab. So for this demonstration, we're going to be talking about creating and managing a simple risk register. I won't go into details where things are elimination or substitution or all those technical health and safety things, just about the structure of your register. There isn't a right and a wrong way of doing it. I'm just going to show you how to do it simply. So the key steps in a risk register is, of course, identifying the hazard, the thing or the situation that's potential to cause harm. We analyze and evaluate the risk, we add controls, and then we review the effectiveness of those controls. So your risk register is found under the risk module under risk assessment. And here's a pretty good risk register here. It's looking quite good, yeah. But if your risk register doesn't look like this, and it looks more like this, it can be pretty overwhelming and scary when you look at your risk register and go, oh, I just can't handle that. And you can, sometimes people ask, how does all this stuff get into the risk register? I didn't add it. Sometimes it enters into the risk register via your portal. When people report a risk and they click save, it's going directly into your risk register. And this is quite unmanageable and we want it more looking like this. So let's make it easier for you. First thing I'm going to do is have a look at the site selection. And we have a black level, red levels, and blue levels. I'm going to add to the site selection. We'll go up to settings, the organization structure, and under the organization structure, I'm going to click on the ABC group and I'm going to add a level. Add level, and I'm going to call that level ZZ. Why I call it ZZ is because your site structure is in alphabetical order and I'd like it at the bottom. So now I've added that to my site structure. Now when I scroll down, I've got a red level, ZZ risk registers. Now I'm going to click on risk registers, and under that, I'm going to add a site. And I'm going to call the site Master Risk Register. I don't have to complete anything else in here, and I'm just going to save that. Scroll down again, add a level. I'm going to call that Critical Risk Register. A lot of companies had 5, 9, 10 critical risks. These are the things that are going to seriously harm our people or kill them. So we put them in a critical risk register. They usually have the highest level of residual risk, and we need to review those controls on a more regular basis. So I'm going to add critical risk register. And the last one I'm going to add, because a lot of people have been asking me, is what's called the COVID risk register. So now I've added those to my site structure. Let's see what it looks like. Down here are my risk registers, and I have all my sites selected. So let's start making your risk register look like that. What I'm going to do is go back to the settings and start doing some background configurable tweaking. So I'll go to settings and I go to the risk settings, and let's have a look at risk management first. Demystify all these settings. So I click on risk management, and it's a simple little show and hide fields in my risk assessment. Checked is show the field and unchecked is hide the field. And if you wanted to add substances or conditions to your risk assessment, you can configure these, turn them all on or turn them all off. Back into settings, I'm going to go to the risk control plan. And although it's a technical term, this is where you could add control measures as templates, the control measures that you use all the time. I could add in here control type, say engineering, whether it's right or wrong. Add the control to all the sites, and I could call that control name implement a traffic management. Save that. And now I know that's in my templated controls. So that's all that is about. next one I want to talk about is risk categories. So most of you should have some default risk categories in here: activity, plant, site, business impact, pandemic protocols. What I did was I added pandemic protocols for my COVID risk register. And how I did that was I come over here to the right-hand side, and there's a little add button there. I could edit one of those controls, or I could bin it. For those of you in Australia, that would be bin. Those of you in Australia, that would be bin. And if you're joining us from everywhere else, that's called delete. So what I did was I added pandemic protocols, and I saved that. And then I need a subcategory underneath. So I clicked add, and I added COVID-19. But of course, that's wrong. So I'm going to edit that. Let's type in there COVID-19 and save. Going back to my settings, so during a risk assessment, users have to analyse the risk posed by the hazard, and they work through a series of classes and a hierarchical control. So in settings, I'll go to risk classes, and you'll see what I mean there. We see where hazard classification could be physical. The hazard category would be manual handling. And of course, if you don't have what's appropriate for your company here, so you use the add button or edit or delete it there. Heavy loads, and the risk would be serious injury. I found these quite confusing. I wanted to make them simpler. So up here, we've got a little edit button for hazard classification. What I'm going to do is I want to change that just to hazard class. A little tick for a save. Hazard category, I'm going to change that to hazard task. Hazard, I'm going to change that to risk. How can it happen? Now you see by changing those settings for risk classes, it all starts to make more sense. The class is physical. I'm doing manual handling as a task. How could it happen? Heavy loads, and what could happen? Serious injury. So as I said, these drop-down lists are fully customizable. For my COVID risk register, what I did was I added biological, airborne, viruses, and serious illness. So now that we've got that sorted, let's go to the risk matrix. And this is the cornerstone of your risk score matrix. This is where this is the back engine of where everything happens. So I've chosen a matrix type of multiplication. My matrix grid is 5 by 5. And I've changed probability to likelihood and net consequence. So if I scroll down, I could add category scores in here. My probability is all free text, and my risk scores are also all free text. If you had a different consequence, if you had, say, insignificant, minor, significant, you could change these here as well. The next tab is the category. Category is also configurable with your scores. The category is free text low, and you can choose the color. I've added a description of what the score is in a multiplication, or like a hint of what that means for the residual score. going to go straight over to hierarchy of controls. I've added my picture of my hierarchy of controls, and again, this is all hints about what I'm choosing when I'm putting it into my risk assessment. All of these culminate in your score matrix. And you'll see this is what my risk matrix looks like now, with a 5 by 5 if the likelihood was almost certain and the consequence was catastrophic. 5 by 5 is going to be an extreme risk, and it should go in my critical risk register. As I went through these tabs and you're busy trying to write down what it looks like because you want yours to look like it, don't worry about it. I've taken screenshots for you and we'll put that in the chat for you. Also up here, I've chosen risk score and category in my view. I could just do the category score. Just like the colors, or customize it. I'm just going to leave it at risk score and category. So that's the background and the settings for the risk score matrix settings, how to make everything work. So let's go and have a look at the risk register now and do some risk assessments. And here it is here with my 74 entries. The review dates in yellow is that I must do them in March. If they were overdue, they'd be in red. And these are my review dates due now. So let's go and add some filters over here in my filters. And you can see what a difference that makes to your register. What I'm going to do here in the category, remember I added pandemic protocols. I'm going to take that off and apply that. And now I have all my risks and hazards without my COVID. So I'm going to save this filter and I'm going to call it all risks except COVID. And I'm going to save that filter. There it is there, all risks except COVID. Now I'm going to go the other way around. Just select my category pandemic protocols, apply that. And here's my COVID risk register. And I'm just going to call that COVID risk register. And save the filter. If I clear those filters now, and I'm going to search for master risk register. Apply that. And here's all the items I've added to my master risk register. So I'm going to save that filter, master risk register, up the top. So now I can go to my filters and I want all the risks except COVID. And just like magic, they should all appear. I want my COVID risk register. And I want my master risk register. There we go. And of course, you could add a filter if you had a critical risk register with your critical risks. So I'm going to click on my filter, all risks except COVID. I'm going to show you how to add and do a risk assessment for a new risk. So over here, I'm going to go add. And it's a new risk, and the subject, I'm going to call that manual handling. And the site, I'm making my master risk register. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and I want it in my master risk register. I'll put in a description there. And it's manual handling, means transporting by load, by hand or bodily force. Category is activity task, and the current status is not started as of today, but I'd probably like to complete that by tomorrow. And I'm going to save that to my risk assessment. And we see here we've got a new risk 1109, and it opens up all these tabs. So as I'm scrolling down, it's populated those sites. The subcategory, I'll probably choose lifting and moving. I can type in my assumptions here, reported by worker, Kelly Stewart, accountable, Larry can be accountable for that. Not started as of today, and I could add my photos. I'll add a photo here, manual lifting, or I could add real live photos of what's happening across my company. And scroll up to the top again, that was the description and the details. So let's go ahead and do a risk analysis. And remember how we changed all those classes and tasks and how can it happen? Now that when we add, it's going to make a lot more sense. So my hazard class would be physical, hazard task, manual handling. How could it happen? Heavy loads, and what could happen? Serious injury. Of course, you could add a new analysis for different things like awkward loads, unstable loads. You could add different ones. I'm just going to add this. And you'll see here, it's populated there. Then I'm going to do my raw risk evaluation. So come down here, I go add, and the impact is going to be on personal injury. And the description, description for that would be a worker could be injured if lifting, moving heavy loads. And then I'm going to bypass likelihood and consequence. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to write myself a little hint. The little hint and the likelihood notes, I'm going to write in there a little hint for myself, ask myself a question. With no controls in place, how likely is it a worker going to be injured lifting or moving heavy loads with no controls in place? Well, the likelihood is probably likely, if not almost certain. I'm going to go almost certain. And in my consequences notes, I'm going to ask myself this question. If a worker did get injured lifting or moving heavy loads, how serious could that be to the worker? That'll be the consequence. Well, it's going to be pretty serious for that worker. So my raw risk is going to be very high. And this was the risk description back in settings to give you a hint about the level of risk requires immediate attention. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now I'm going to scroll up to the top to the third tab and let's add some control measures. Let's try and mitigate how serious this injury could be. So my raw risk was very high. And I'm going to come down here and this is where I would add my control measures. I'm going to go add. Back in the settings, I showed you where the templated controls were. So I could select a templated control and I could think about my control measures for mitigating the risk of injury for lifting heavy loads. So I want them to use correct lifting techniques. And it fills in everything else here. I'll untick that. Larry, you're responsible for that. I could add files in here and I could save that. I'm going to add another control. And most people have what? Lifting aids. And save that. I'd like them to have safety footwear. And I know that everyone's got safety footwear, so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to put that as completed and save that. I could also add a one-off control, something that wasn't in my templates. And the control type may be administrative, and I could put the control name only trained workers. Add a sign, completed, and save that. So now I've added all the control measures for my lifting heavy loads. Now I'm going to do the post or residual risk score. And post corrective action, I'm going to write myself a little note that says, with all controls in place, likely is it a worker could be injured with all those controls in place. How likely is it that a worker could be injured lifting heavy loads? Well, now I've got all those controls in place, I'm going to say it's still possible. And down here in the consequence notes, with all those controls in place, if a worker did get injured lifting or moving heavy loads, how serious could that injury be? Well, I've reduced the likelihood, but I don't think those controls have reduced the consequences. So it's still going to be pretty serious. And I'm going to save that to corrective actions. Corrective risk assessment. So now we've gone from a raw risk of very high down to a residual risk of high. We've added our controls and we've assessed the risk. So with our residual risk being 9 still high, I'd probably like to review that risk probably every 3 to 6 months. So I'm going to go up to reviews and I'm going to add a review today. I'm going to save that review from today. And my next review, I'm going to put it in, say, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll put it in August. August the 16th sounds good to me. And I'm going to save that to the risk assessment. And there we have it. We've added to our risk register manual handling to the master risk register. Now that I've added my risks to the master risk register, these are like my templates. These are the things that I don't want anyone else to mess with. But of course, across my sites, manual handling in Sydney might be different to what's in New Zealand. So I'm going to go back to my risk assessment. And I'm going to copy my manual handling with those controls. And I'm going to allocate it to a site. And the people at that site could add their own controls or manage their own notifications or their own review dates. You'll see we've got a new risk now, 1110, manual handling. And now if I click the site, I'm going to allocate that to Melbourne. And if I save that in Melbourne, they might have different controls here, or they might have additional controls that other sites don't have. So I'm going to save that to my risk assessment. So that means the people in Melbourne are going to be working on their manual handling risk, and I'll still have my template in the master risk register. And if I wanted to add anything more, I'm just going to click on the master risk register. And there we have it. So with our master risk register, I could print just that risk, or I could go over here to my reports. And as you see, I have the master risk register selected. So I'm going to go over to the reports. And you'll see here in the reports, there's 123. They vary from company to company, templated reports already made. So we're dealing with our risk register. So I'm going to look for the reports for risk register. And I've got risk register here, all risks. I can view that. And I'm just going to select all the records. And I want to show my corrective controls, and I can preview that. So there we have our risk register, all risks, including the corrective controls. I could print that, or I could go back, and once I like it in the preview, I could download that as a PDF or a spreadsheet. I could also select the risk that I wanted to use. Going back to the reports, detailed risks. All the risks, I could view that. And there I have a detailed risks. I said before I wanted it just for my master risk register. So this is when I can go to the site selection. I'm going to untick everything, scroll down to the bottom. I just want my master risk register. Back to my reports. And I'll preview that, my master risk register. And then we have our master risk register, all risks. And of course, you could do the same with your COVID risk register. So heading back down to the dashboard, I've pretty much showed you how to add a risk to your risk register, the settings behind the risk register, and the filters that you could set in place to make your life easier so that it doesn't look like an awful database. So what I'm going to do is just have a quick look at the chat. If you are referring to the online help links, you can really share, you can even embed them. Oh, thanks so much, Andrew. Are the PowerPoints trademarked, or can they be used with our teams? I can't see any questions there, Prakash. So unless anyone types in a question there. I think I've just about had it. Perfect. Thank you. So there we have it, team. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you do have any questions about the risk register, using the impacts, or anything else in Damstra Safety that you wanted assistance with in training, please reach out to your customer success manager or directly to Prakash, and we'll try to help you there. Prakash, have you got any parting words?
Hey Ruth, thank you so much for that. That was a brilliant session, I would say. There's not much of a questions we have got on the chat during this webinar, but there are a couple of things about the recordings and the help center. So help center guide just for FYI to all the attendees on the webinar. The help guide which Ruth have showed during the beginning of the webinar. So those help guides can be shared across to your team. So that's centrally available on the help center in Damstra Technologies. So you can share that along with your team, or if any of the members want to look into the help center guide, you have feel free to do share those. And the recording for this webinar will be shared to all the attendees, and it will either come from myself or from the marketing team or from any of the other representative from the Damstra Technologies. So it will be shared across to you, and you can internally refer it uh, during your risk assessment or risk register or a COVID-19 assessment within your organization. Um, Thank you, Ruth. And before we close off these sessions, do we have any questions? We will open the lines for another couple of minutes. So feel free to uh, type in your questions, your comments, or the sessions, and then Ruth and myself will be available for another 2-3 minutes to take up the questions and answer it for you. Ruth, do we have a question from Jason Howie?
We do. Jason, yes, if you do put the site at the red level, it will be available to the sites underneath there in the blue levels. If you put it at a blue level, the risk register is only available at that site for the blue levels. Great question.
Just for the benefit of all the attendees, I'm just adding in the help center URL. Maybe you can just feel free to have that and have a look. I'm just putting it on the chat. Thanks, John, for that.
Thanks, Prakash.